Olá, bem-vindos a mais um episódio do nosso videocast Cortex Frontal, o videocast para o jornal Sol. Aqui já sabem, discutimos sempre aqueles temas que por alguma razão estão arredados da comunicação social mainstream, embora sejam temas nevrálgicos e fundamentais para a sociedade portuguesa, europeia e talvez até mundial. Aqui discutimos sempre política com P, capital, e nunca nos perdemos em assuntos de sumenos. Hoje vamos falar de um tema muito importante e que, aliás, ganhou pódio justamente durante a Covid, mas que, efetivamente, penso que é um assunto que interessa à maior parte das pessoas e que necessita, evidentemente, de um especialista para o discutir. Estou a falar das guerras químicas e das guerras biológicas. E hoje, justamente para debater este tema, temos uma convidada muito especial, a Meryl Nass, que é médica, médica de família, que se tornou uma pessoa especialmente vocal durante a Covid e que é especialista justamente em vacinas e em guerras biológicas. Hi, Meryl. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to this videocast.
Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be there.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you here today. I've been a follower of your work and of your interventions. I was just explaining in Portuguese that you were very vocal during COVID, and you are an expert, besides being a medical doctor and a family doctor, you are an expert on vaccines and chemical and biological warfare weapons. But during COVID, namely because you wanted to treat your patients with the ivermectin, you were cancelled and you even have your professional license taken off you. I'm saying this correctly, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. So you're kind of a hero to me. During this period of COVID and the more and more censorship in the world and lots of forbidden words and forbidden thoughts. This has been a clear division of the waters, and so now at least the good part is now we know where each one of us stands. So thank you for your work, Meryl. And I wanted to talk and debate a little bit about this issue of biological and chemical weapons. Firstly, because it was never a conversation fully, it was never actually debated, the origin of COVID, since you know, obviously, that people like me and perhaps like you, I don't know, that discussed this supposedly origin in the market and also tried to verify and to look at the information that pointed elsewhere to the lab leak. Knowing, of course, that lab leaks are very common, they're not rare. These people were cancelled. So I would like to have your opinion about this to start.
Well, you know, when COVID started, I assumed it was probably a lab leak because it began in a city that had a lab that was doing work on viruses that could cause pandemics. And because what's so-called spillover from animals to humans is an extremely rare event. And when it happens, it essentially doesn't, apart from influenza, it doesn't cause pandemics. Mm-hmm. And so I assumed that. I was surprised when Peter Daszak and other people wrote a letter to The Lancet basically threatening those of us who said it was a lab leak, that we were conspiracy theorists, and we were interfering with the relationship between the United States and China, and that we needed China to help manage the pandemic. And so we were actually, causing people to die because we suggested it might be a lab leak. Then that was in February. In March, I saw the article by Kristen Anderson and 4 other scientists explaining how it couldn't possibly be a lab-built origin, but it had to have come from nature. And that article actually made no scientific sense. And I was shocked that no scientists criticized it. I criticized it in a blog I was writing at the end of March, and another scientist had criticized it. And of course, now everybody who reads it understands that it made no sense. It's extraordinary that it even got published. And it was a cover-up. And now, of course, we know that Tony Fauci suggests and Jeremy Farrar suggested the article be written and then blew it up, told the media that this was a very, very important article, and it settled the question of whether this came from a lab or came from a natural origin. So we were fooled from the beginning about it. And I hope everyone now understands that this could only have come from a lab. There are too many, there are probably a dozen or more different things that were specifically designed to make it infect humans, to make it infect more organs than it normally would have if it was a regular coronavirus, to make it more transmissible, more virulent, etc. And to make it impair the body's immune response. So these things don't happen by accident.
No.
And, so the only question now is, was it a lab leak? Was it an accidental release, or was it a deliberate release? And if it was a deliberate release, you would release it somewhere to make it look like an accident, somewhere like, the North Carolina lab or the Wuhan lab.
Yes, the thing is, well, firstly, maybe I should underline that this conversation is important, the origins of the virus, because we have to understand what really happened here, right? Because some people say, oh, it doesn't matter, the origins, where it came from, because what matters, what is important is that affected millions of people. This is wrong. We have to understand, not only in the name of science, but also in the name of politics, of society, we have to understand where it came from. Namely, because it shall be very important in the future if we have to deal with other viruses or whatever, right? Then,
absolutely.
Sorry?
Also, if it came from a lab, it's very likely that the people who developed it in the lab also developed countermeasures. So they may have already developed a vaccine or drugs or tested drugs. And we need to know that because we need access to them. So for many reasons, it's important. But first of all, primarily, it's important because we have to shut down this type of research. There's no need for our own species to be creating diseases that will kill millions of people.
Right.
It's unethical. It goes against the Biological Weapons Convention. It goes against Security Council Memorandum 1540 and customary international law. People are not supposed to be making weapons of mass destruction, period.
Yeah, of course. Meryl, this is a very important point that you're making, because it's like when we talk about nuclear weapons and all the conventions, the treaties, international treaties that want to stop the proliferation, we also have to include and discuss this theme of biological weapons, because they may be as deadly or more than nuclear weapons. And also, I think it's very important that we think about these origins of the coronavirus, of this coronavirus, also because whatever happened here, first, obviously, we have to think statistically. If the spillover between animals and humans is rare, as we know it is, and if it was there was a lab there and everything, why can't we look at first and at least consider the hypothesis, the obvious hypothesis, right? Because all this gaslighting and telling people that what is obvious and what is really in front of our eyes, we should not believe or even think about it, seems to me a very dangerous psychological operation, right? Because we
yes,
are
exactly.
Right? And also because then what happened after that, as you were saying, also points to the lab leak. Because if you want to try to cover up something, if you want to lie about something, this article that you were talking about, the way it was entered in the mainstream, etc., really points to the hypothesis of a lab leak, right? And even to the hypothesis of a deliberate lab leak.
Right. So if it's deliberate, it's not a leak. So
Yes,
don't use
of
the
course.
term lab
Right,
leak.
sorry.
Yeah. So lab origin, rather than natural
precisely.
origin.
Thank you. Yes. Also, I don't know, I would like to know your thoughts about this, but it has been argued that these vaccines, the vaccine mRNA vaccines that were produced, they should have been prepared before, because the time available to do this production would be too short. It would be impossible. So when you were saying, Meryl, that when in a lab some kind of viruses or toxin is produced as a biological weapon, all the scientists also are producing at the same time countermeasures. Could be this the case? Could these vaccines or whatever be the case in this deliberate lab dissemination?
Yeah, so certainly it is common. I can't tell you whether it happens all the time, but if you make a good biological weapon, it makes sense to create a countermeasure, because otherwise you can't protect yourself. At Fort Detrick, scientists have died, and even an electrician had died because they were exposed to organisms there and were not protected. This is going back about 70 years. And so that it became common. Back in the 1980s, I had a list of 88 different vaccines that had been developed at Fort Detrick for their own use. While they were working on these potential biological weapons, they could be protected. So it just makes sense. Now, why would you do this? Why would you create these weapons? Well, and where did the recipe for the vaccine come from? Because in the United States, it was a military operation. It was said that the military was used because they could control supply chains. They could get the ingredients to the manufacturers in a more efficient way than if we left, in the middle of the pandemic when things were shut down. But maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe it was the military that provided the manufacturers with the recipe, and maybe the recipe for the vaccine, as well as the recipe for the virus, had already been developed as something known to be highly toxic. Now, we don't know that. But when you're making a vaccine, you're not supposed to use the most toxic part of the virus or the bacterium. You're supposed to choose a non-toxic part, and yet the spike was known to be highly toxic, and it was included in the vaccine.
Yes.
One wonders how that decision was made.
Well, I don't know if you are familiar with that information. In Portugal, here in Portugal, it was also a military operation to distribute and apply the vaccines. It was global, so it's also a bit strange, at least that this kind of articulation was held in such a short period of time. Meryl, you were talking a while ago about the Biological Weapons Convention.
Yes.
Yes, but this convention is not respected. It is not followed. What is going on with that?
Well, lots of things aren't followed. Not the laws aren't followed. This was the earliest treaty. It was originated in the United States in 1972.
1972, okay.
okay, to ban an entire class of weapons, biological weapons. It was initiated by President Nixon and Henry Kissinger. And it's been signed by over 180 countries. However, when it was initiated, there were no provisions for punishing countries or subnational groups that didn't obey, and there was no provision for doing inspections back in the 70s. Now, later, we had the Chemical Weapons Convention, and they figured out how to add provisions for inspections and punishments, and that model could have been applied to the Biological Weapons Convention, but it wasn't, and the United States blocked it, often just with a few other countries going along. Why did we block it? I would posit now, having seen COVID, that the United States did not want people to be able to investigate us. In any event, so the treaty exists. It is international law. You're not allowed to proliferate biological weapons. You're not allowed to use them, and you're not supposed to produce them, except very small quantities that might be necessary for drugs and vaccines.
Okay.
However, we know that multiple countries, including Russia and the United States, have transgressed the treaty, have not obeyed provisions in the past.
With no sanctions. No sanctions.
No sanctions. No sanctions. Just embarrassing. That's. And it seems that when everybody else figured out that the United States and Russia weren't following the treaty, they thought they didn't have to follow it either. And so there you are. So gain of function research, which most people thought was banned by the treaty, became a real thing. And scientists just started doing it. NIH started giving out grants for it. Other countries gave out grants for it. And basically, we were off to the races, which means that there was no stopping it. And it was given a new name. So it used to be called germ warfare research, then biological warfare research. Then it got a little gentler as biological defense research. And then it was called gain of function research. And it was all the same thing, making biological weapons and the countermeasures for them. And under that name, it went along until about 2014, when there were some very dangerous experiments performed in the United States at the University of Wisconsin and in Netherlands at Erasmus University. And scientists around the world complained that this was creating very, very dangerous organisms that could escape and cause terrible pandemics. And they begged countries to control it. And so Obama, in 2014, put a moratorium on two kinds of experiments. And it's interesting what he chose. Okay. One was influenza bird flu experiments. The other was coronavirus experiments to create things like SARS and Middle East respiratory syndrome. And he didn't ban gain of function research for any other viruses or bacteria. However, the research continued despite the ban. And what's his name? Ralph Baric published a paper and said, well, we got a waiver, so we continued to do the research.
Okay.
Now, it turned out after the pandemic started that NIH did not issue a waiver to Ralph Baric. But somebody told him he had a waiver, otherwise he wouldn't have published it. He would have just been silent.
Of course.
So he was under the impression he had a waiver. It means basically that the moratorium didn't work. It did not have effect. Scientists continued to do the research. We had a pandemic. We don't know if it was deliberate or accidental.
Or not, yeah.
And what the WHO is doing now is encouraging all the nations of the world to do this same gain of function research and provide the organisms they find or create to the WHO, which will maintain a library of them and share them worldwide to try to encourage more drugs and vaccines to be developed.
Oh, this is really scary. This is really, yeah, it's really scary listening to this because obviously that lab leaks are relatively common, and obviously that this gain of function, well, language is a weapon also, right? this biological and chemical warfare, the fact that the investigation here is receiving lots of funding, it's like suicidal. It's creating a parallel nature in the globe, a parallel living organisms that obviously can escape deliberately, accidentally, of our control. So why is obvious for war. What other purpose could this have other than killing people and devastating countries and populations? And it's really scary listening to you and understanding that the WHO, that should defend our health, is actually putting it in risk.
Yes, yes, it's extraordinary. Well, WHO has become a captured agency.
Yes.
And 85% of its funding comes from donors. Only 15% comes from dues from its members. And so the WHO does what its funders want. And Bill Gates is its biggest funder.
Yeah.
You take away the United States most years. Other big funders are the UK and Germany, and pharmaceutical companies, other what we used to call philanthropies, but turns out they're working for their own benefit. So that would be the Wellcome Trust, the Rockefeller Foundation,
Yes.
things like this.
Yeah.
And Bill Gates and his team, he has several different nonprofits that all support the WHO. One is Gavi, one is
Gavi.
CEPI. Yes, so Gavi is there to roll out, billions of vaccines to developing countries, and CEPI is there to develop vaccines in 100 days, when it normally takes at least 10 years to develop a vaccine.
Yeah. Do you know who used to be, just a small note here for our Portuguese followers and viewers, the Gavi responsible director was ex Prime Minister, Portuguese Prime Minister, Durão Barroso. I'm sure that you've heard this name before.
Yeah.
And his career was it was pushed up with the war in Iraq, where there was this global alliance between UK, US, and Europe of invading Iraq after a global lie that swear to people that they have seen the proofs of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. So he started his career there with fake weapons of mass destruction, and then diversed to real weapons of destruction, directing Gavi.
Yes, it's very interesting. The number of politicians who were not particularly popular in their own countries have gone to Geneva or to Brussels and made big careers there, basically pushing a globalist program. And now when you look around, you see that, most nations in the West are led by people who were trained as young global leaders by the World Economic Forum, or who support a globalist, a one world government agenda.
Yes.
And what's going on with the WHO is an attempt to globalize the management of health and to include things, environmental issues, pollution, anything that might potentially threaten public health, such as food issues and climate, all are being placed into the basket of health. So that
one health, right? The concept of one health.
One health.
Yeah.
One health, one government. Yes, one people. Now the Nazis had these slogans also.
Of course.
Yeah.
Meryl, I'm a clinical psychologist, so for me, it's I really feel bad about this situation because I see many of the knowledges of my area of studies being wrongly applied, like you also in your area of expertise probably happens the same, but it's a mourning process actually, and it's especially hard when you work daily with this kind of issues, and then you see that science is being applied, is in the wrong hands actually. So let me just to try to enlighten our followers here, how frequent are lab leaks? Because I assume that many people that are watching will be thinking that, well, but I'm sure they have all the security and all the protocols to assure that nothing will happen. Is that so?
Yes. So the United States thinks it has the best biosecurity labs, biocontainment laboratories. And we have many of them. You know, we have, I don't know, several hundred.
Hundreds?
We have, yes, several hundred. We have both BSL-4 and BSL-3, which means in those labs, you cannot breathe the air in the lab, but you're in a special spacesuit with a pipe that gives you, air to breathe.
Okay.
So that any microorganisms that are in the environment you're not breathing them in. Despite this, you can't do the work safely because you are working for several reasons. You're working with small animals. You're using mice, rats, guinea pigs, and sometimes they bite you. So your infected animals are not happy, and they will bite a worker, or a worker is injecting them, and the animal wriggles around and they inject themselves. There are other things that happen. So you drop something and it spills, and maybe the broken glass cuts through your glove or your gown or your spacesuit. Things happen. In the United States, in order to comply with the Biological Weapons Convention, scientists who do research with these organisms, and they're designated as select agents in the U.S., must report to the CDC and comply with their requirements. And whenever there is a leak or an accident, a loss of agent, or a theft, that must be reported. And the CDC collects 200 reports a year of this, of these problems. Now, usually nobody gets sick, but sometimes people get sick. And there's a lot of sloppiness. So a reporter for USA Today spent 2 years studying these biocontainment laboratories, and they have them at CDC, at NIH, at the FDA, at many universities, etc. And she found extraordinary instances of sloppiness. So
because
government labs
we are humans.
We're humans and lazy and foolish. So the labs were supposed to decontaminate. They were basically supposed to kill bird flu, kill anthrax in the labs, and then send out the killed organisms to labs to test to see if they could detect them. But instead, they were sending live bird flu, live anthrax, and live other things through the mail to labs, and hundreds of labs were basically contaminated with these living organisms, not only in the U.S., in every state of the U.S. and in several dozen foreign countries. So when the news got out, that was the same time as the moratorium was put into place. It was basically to shut down all the media reports. When CDC was trying to close, CDC had some leaks from labs, and so they were using duct tape around the door.
Duct tape, How professional. That really sounds like high security.
Exactly. Another thing that happens is you have negative pressure in the laboratories, but when the equipment breaks down, you have positive pressure. So that pushes the air out through cracks. And there's all sorts of things that can happen. I mean, doing the work on these organisms is a very dangerous operation. It's now done in a minimum of 20 countries around the world, and probably many, many countries around the world. So if the United States has 200 reported accidents a year, and you demand, if, as the WHO is trying to do, that every country do this same type of research and have sequencing laboratories and high containment laboratories in every country, that's 194 countries that are members of the World Health Organization. 200 accidents times 194 is a lot of accidents. You're looking at, tens of thousands of accidents a year. You almost can guarantee that we will have more pandemics.
Yeah, we can almost guarantee that something catastrophic might happen. Obviously, it's statistical. It's probabilities.
Exactly. And then they're going to roll out the 100-day vaccines. So you can statistically guarantee that they're going to be a problem too, because they have no liability attached. That's another thing the WHO has required. Nations take away liability from the manufacturer, from the nation, and from the WHO. Well, you can't make drugs and vaccines without testing them. You have to wait a while to see what they do, what the problems are. You can't assess them quickly. And if you try, you can guarantee you're going to have more harm than benefit. As we've shown with the COVID vaccines, we showed this with the vaccines that were rolled out for the swine flu in 2009 that caused well over 1,000 cases of narcolepsy in adolescents in Europe, where one of the brands of vaccines was used that wasn't properly studied. I mean, we showed it with swine flu vaccines in 1976 in the United States. There has never been a time when a vaccine was rolled out without proper testing that it didn't do more harm than good.
Of course.
So
for some reason, there is a protocol and several steps and phases that should be followed.
Exactly. But there's a lot of money to be made in countermeasures.
That's the problem.
Especially when there's no liability, right? You don't have to pay for insurance. It's all profit. And so there are many vested interests, and those vested interests happen to be the entities that pay for the WHO.
This most of these labs and that receive this funding and all this money, they are property of big pharma, or do we know who are the owners?
So most of the laboratories are either government laboratories or university laboratories. But because of the law, which is idiosyncratic in the United States, if you build a private high containment laboratory, you don't have to report anything to the government.
You're joking.
No.
So just come again. So if we build a private lab.
If you and I build our own laboratory to do gain of function research, and we don't use any funding from the government, we don't even have to tell them the lab exists. Now, if I wanted to get the microorganisms from a lab in Manassas, Virginia, that reports to the government, then they would find out I had those microorganisms. But if I went to, North Korea, say, and brought home some of these viruses and bacteria and started studying them in my own private laboratory, nobody would know. There would be no report. So
it is really a shame that public opinion is not more conscious of this problem, and doesn't really get involved with this cause, because it seems to me that it should be like it's a subject that would interest and mobilize most people, right? To know that for no other reason than war, we are building manipulating new microorganisms, and for profit and everything. So it's obviously, we can understand now better why this is a subject totally blocked on the mainstream media, and it's never discussed there. So what we're talking about, Meryl, is a real danger of having another pandemic, right?
Yes, absolutely. And not just one. I mean, it could be
just
one
one.
after the other. If there's a lot of money to be made in rolling out vaccines, why stop at one?
Yeah, of course. Do you know that now von der Leyen is being investigated for the contract with Pfizer, right?
About time.
Yeah, it's about time, but I don't know if it will be producing any results. But anyway, so you, with your experience, you'd say like in 2-year time or 5 years, we'd have another pandemic.
No, you can't say. I mean, we have no idea.
We cannot say.
What we can say is that it's really important to do things in a smart way that's going to minimize the risk. And what the WHO is doing, so the WHO has been creating a pandemic treaty.
Yes.
It's had 7 or 8 different versions. It's had actually 3 different versions in the last 2 months. So I'm not sure what that was about, but in several of the versions, they have actually encouraged gain-of-function research and said that the Director General of the WHO can appoint scientists who will supervise gain-of-function research. So that's crazy. That's anti-human. In another version, which came out last June, the document suggested that countries that were doing gain-of-function research should relax the strictures on it. They should reduce the administrative impediments to this kind of research.
Even more.
So, these are crazy suggestions, and they lead me to believe that one of the purposes of this WHO treaty is to encourage future pandemics.
Yeah, besides encourage future pandemics, and then has to have the power of controlling all the countries without any sovereignty, right? Without any autonomy, to control them and decide from their offices what we are going to do here in Lisbon or in the United States or wherever, without even knowing the specific reality, social, cultural, etc., of health infrastructures, for instance, of each country. This is the WHO treaty is a problem, a huge problem we are facing right now. So as you were saying, the WHO is now occupied by profitable organizations, highly profitable organizations. Their course is psychopath, because developing biological and chemical warfare is obviously a very dangerous state of mind. And what can we do as citizens? What can we do to not only fight against this oligarchy? We don't have a democracy. How can we?
Yes.
Rebuild our democracies, and what can we do as citizens to protect ourselves from supposedly new pandemic?
Well, I think the WHO, even though it is an unaccountable agency and its employees have diplomatic immunity and it is not under the jurisdiction of any court, still, it relies on its members. The WHO would not exist if it did not have members. So a country could leave the WHO and then it would not be subject to any of its future rules and regulations. But I think more profitably, questions need to be asked in the parliaments, in the Parliament of Portugal. Why are we supporting an agency that is encouraging the development of gain-of-function research and new pandemic pathogens? Why would we want to do that? Why are we allowing an organization that is not holding votes? It is holding fake procedures that it calls consensus procedures to ram through its proposals rather than conducting votes according to the constitution of the WHO. Why didn't it make a final version of the amendments that are proposed to be voted on next month?
May, right?
Why didn't it? in May, why didn't it show them to the member states 4 months in advance according to the rules of the international health regulations? Why is the WHO breaking all its own rules? Why is it putting things like surveillance and censorship into the international health regulations and the pandemic treaty when it's supposed to be a health agency? It's not supposed to order nations to censor their citizens. Why is this even happening? This has gone way beyond the purview of the WHO. And so maybe this is an organization we don't want to belong to anymore. And we can get out by pointing out that the WHO has lost its way. It's swerved into a completely new direction of trying to govern the health of the world, and we don't want it. So I think that the best thing to do is ask those questions publicly, because there are no good answers. Now, what's happened so far when they've been asked, for instance, in England, the health minister has been given, a briefing paper, bullet points, and he reads off them and he says, oh, none of that is happening. Well, it is happening. It's right there in the proposed treaty, in the proposed international health regulation amendments. And these people, the health minister didn't know because he didn't bother to read the documents, because all his job is to do is to read the bullet points. And we have to shove documents in front of them and say, look, here it is. They've lied to you. They've lied to the public. This is what they want to do. Are you going to, perform due diligence and protect the citizens of your nation? Or are you going to go along, like an idiot and believe your bullet points?
Well, Meryl, we have a similar experience here in Portugal, because Martha, Martha Gameiro, which is a colleague of you, she's a medical doctor too, she did a petition so we could present it at the parliament, and I went with her to present it at the Portuguese parliament, a petition to oppose the WHO treaty. And members of the parliament that received us, actually by law here in Portugal, every political party has to be present in this kind of meetings. So only one or two, we have 10 political parties, only one of two were actually knew what we were talking about. The rest of them didn't even dream what was like the WHO treaty. What are you talking about? They were daydreaming, totally off reality, not understanding anything we were saying. So I understand what you're saying, that we need we need politicians that in the parliament do their job of representing the people. Democracy is by the people, for the people, with the people. And then we need journalists that can do their job. But there aren't any, or very few here in Portugal. And I think in the States, there aren't many also, are they?
No, there has been a complete blackout of this subject. So absolutely no mainstream media have covered it. And when it does get covered by, secondary media, alternative media, a lot of it is lies, because the World Health Organization is putting out lies. Oh, no, we are not taking away sovereignty. Oh, no, we're not doing this. No, we're not doing that. We're not going to impose mandates. We're not going to impose lockdowns. Well, the documents say you are, so, but as long as nobody reads the documents, they get away with it. And they have the mouthpiece. We don't. It's a very, very dangerous time. It's a dangerous situation. What's likely to happen, because, forces have control of mainstream media worldwide, these documents will probably be accepted in May. And then it's going to be up to the people to actually figure out that they are not going to comply, that there are 8 billion of us. There are, a few thousand people who are globalists and who have appointed their own folks to run nations in the world. But There are more of us, and just because they have a corrupt process for bringing these rules, regulations, and laws to control us, we don't have to obey. And I think people have to learn that, once the noose around our necks tightens, unfortunately, if I'm able to educate, the problem for the globalists is there are many nations who have leaders that they don't control. They can bribe them. But there are still nations in Asia and Africa who they don't control. And so if those nations can honestly respond, they may save us. And then there are nations like Italy in which a lot of media, now a few mainstream media and a lot of alternative media are actually telling the story. Unfortunately, there are very few countries in which Italian is spoken. And so that information is not getting out. But the Italians know more about this than anybody in Europe. So, will the globalists be able to control the Italian government or not? That's a question.
I think they will, because I've been watching Meloni and the way she has been rising in Europe, how close she is to von der Leyen now, etc. And so she used not to be that close. She used to have a different political position. So I believe that it's just a matter of time, because actually, when politicians don't, at least here in Europe, when they don't comply with the globalist agenda, they are put aside, or the country suffers. The debt, the public debt, or something like that.
Exactly.
Something will happen. Something will happen to that country, or to that, and to that politician.
Leader.
Yeah, leader, exactly.
Right. So what we have to do is we have to get lots of states in the United States and lots of countries doing this together.
Yes.
And then we won't be able to punish the few that are resisting. That's very important.
Yes, it
and
is.
Italy's aware of that.
Yeah. It has been a difficult path, very challenging, very narrow. But obviously, it seems that there is no other path.
No other choice.
No, yeah.
No.
Just before we finished, I would like to ask for your generous and medical opinion, because other thing that concerns me is the state of our global health. Portuguese is a country that are people that we eat lots of fish, and we still have the Mediterranean diet. You know, we eat quite healthy, less and less with the new generations, but still. Though we don't practice much physical exercise, I would say that our global health could be much better if people were conscious of how to take care of themselves. And this is really, I'm also a mother of two toddlers, and this really worries me, because what I see is like people can worry a lot with COVID or, you know, with the masks and something, but they don't take care of their health. They don't eat properly, they don't sleep properly. So is there anything that people can do also to be more robust and face problems, health problems better in the future?
I was disappointed when I was in Portugal that you had so many American candies and things like that in stores. So I think you get rid of that stuff. You eat, you have sunlight. You are able to get out and get vitamin D most of the year.
Yeah.
But if people are indoors, take vitamin D and measure your blood level. If you have a high blood level of vitamin D, you are much less likely to catch infections, especially infections like COVID, and it will be a milder infection. You want to take zinc. Walking is wonderful. You have these elevators. You make it easy for people to get around in Porto and Lisbon. Lots of buses, but I would encourage the Portuguese. You have such a beautiful country. It's wonderful to be outside. be outside as much as you can, get the sunlight and get the exercise, and make up for the time of Salazar when you weren't able to
Yeah.
eat properly, you were hungry, grow gardens, prepare. There are efforts being made. We're killing chickens now in the United States because of bird flu, even though it doesn't harm people anymore. It caused one person to get a pink eye, a minor eye infection, and now they're killing over 1 million chickens because of that. Don't believe that. Grow your own chickens if you can, grow your own vegetables. You don't want to eat bugs.
No,
Prepare
definitely
for
not.
what's coming.
Well, thank you so much. It was like really inspiring talking to you. We could talk for another hour, I'm sure. Meryl Nass, you're definitely a heroine for us here. Keep on fighting. We count on you, and the resistance is trying to stay strong and together, and we'll be in touch. Quanto a vocês, muito obrigada por terem assistido a mais este episódio do nosso videocast Cortex Frontal. Já sabem que aqui nós vamos sempre debater aqueles temas que nós consideramos que são realmente importantes para a sociedade e que por alguma razão, sem mais delongas ou teorias da conspiração, se por alguma razão parecem totalmente arredados daquilo que são os órgãos de comunicação social mainstream, à exceção aqui, claro, do jornal Sol. Até à próxima. Se gostaram, por favor, deem-nos o vosso like, partilhem e recomendem aos amigos.